Hi guys and welcome. This is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, artist, memoir writer, bipolar psychiatric survivor, and your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast, the place that offers an alternative perspective on mental illness, highlighting creativity, non-conventional healing, and breaking on through to the other side. If you are ready for a new narrative on the mental realm that celebrates crazy and cool without penalty, then Not As Crazy As You Think is for you. Chapter 6. Mahan Dear. As we drove back to New Delhi, the sun rose in deep maroon and tangerine orange hues, casting their light upon the dingy gray of the poverty-stricken streets. Mahan Dear saw how dreadfully ill and stressed I was and provided me with comfort by not asking too many questions. We first hit the nearest post office so that I could mail to my family a letter that I had managed to scrawl during my debilitating emotional state in that base motel room between flows. Now that I didn't have a place to stay, we had no way of getting in touch with each other. My parents and I had maintained some landline communication when I stayed with the Nayars, and if they were to call after I had left, they might be terribly worried. But if the mail was as unreliable as the public transportation schedule in India, they might never receive it at all. I trotted up the few steps to the building, and suddenly a large group of untouchables chanting something in exotic tongues swarmed me, their faces twisted with lesions. One man with rotted flesh, hideously half-eaten by some form of leprosy, jumped out in front of me. My heart raced, and as I pulled away, quickening my pace, he called out, "Money! Money!" Never before had I felt this frightened of humanity or of the evil that was fixed within the picture of my surroundings. Such an antithesis to the beauty of the Taj Mahal, and so horrific. The clutching untouchables engulfed me, groping me with their hands like the movie Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, when the villagers hung on to Indy with begging moans to find their sacred stones and save them from drought. But I didn't know how to retrieve their sacred stones as Indy had. What could I possibly do? Maybe if I blessed the street dwellers, one by one, that should count for something. I looked at each one and said inwardly, "God bless you. God bless you." I delivered blessings to as many souls as I could, even as I got back into the vehicle and continued our way along the road. How many people could I bless? God bless you. God bless you. I felt like Oscar Schindler in Schindler's List, pleading with Ben Kingsley to take just one more precious ring. But I had nothing to bestow upon these poor souls except a mere God bless you. My yearning to get back home as soon as possible increased in urgency. An emergency ticket home was the only way, so Mahan Dear brought me straight to the Delta airline agency, seeming to have as much stake in saving my sorry ass as I did. I rang the bell at the counter with fidgety hands, looking like a street rat next to these neatly kept white-collared clerks, who took their damn sweet time. "Please, can you help me?" I was desperate. Although the runs had dried up a bit, pangs of pain began to spin again in my belly. "Please hold out until I secure another hotel room, for God's sake." "Your card, please." I handed the dapper gentleman, dressed in a well-tailored blue suit, my American Express card. I looked back at Mahan Dear sitting attentively in the waiting area, ready at a moment's notice for me, and I was lucky for that. But I would soon be off on a plane home to luxurious America, and Mahan Dear would not be so lucky, and would continue to live in this squalor and be content with it, or be unhappy for the rest of his immobile life. "I'm sorry, miss, the process was denied," he told me. "What? What do you mean?" "Oh, no. I had not budgeted for an emergency airline ticket bought at top dollar. I didn't have the credit line." "There's a problem with your card. It's not accepting purchases." "But that cannot be!" I caught myself mimicking the British Hindi air of the Nayar family, as though I would be given the kind of royal treatment they expected from the world. "This is absolutely ridiculous, impossible, and a terrible mistake," I cried. "I will not accept that." The man looked at me with a blank face, took back the card, and ran it through again. Process denied. "Sorry, miss." I stood there unresponsive, stunned. Wait, would this mean I couldn't get home? I simply could not withstand another 2 weeks here in India under this condition. And with no credit card and no traveler's checks, I had only dwindling cash. This stupid don't leave home without a piece of plastic sworn all over American advertising that it would save the day abroad was now saying that an American should die? My aching stomach tightened in a knot as panic set in. I knew that if I should stay there beyond 48 hours, I was compromising my safety and my life. But the attendants did not seem troubled by my desperation. They looked upon me with indifference as another unfortunate soul trapped in the masses of death in their culture. Stripped of my identity and former self-image, I was nothing more than just another victim of circumstance. I broke down in sobs, knowing I was utterly alone. I came to India to pursue nothing but noble truths and peace, with an open mind and with love in my heart. Was this the death I deserved, so nameless and random? Suddenly, amid my giving up and giving in to despair, a brown man's arms embraced my limp, dehydrated body, sending a bolt of rejuvenation and love down my spine. Mahan Dear reached out and hugged me tight. A strange white woman dressed in khaki shorts with an Indiana Jones hat perched atop her head, who could have been a British diplomat's daughter. This man risked crossing caste barriers, which is not a common occurrence in a land where sacred cows still roam the streets and where imperialist ghosts still pervade through unspoken laws. I sighed and sobbed and leaned into him like a soldier pulled out from the battlefield. Suddenly, the electricity shut down, bringing down the computers with it. Could this be a potential grace from God? In a furious manner, I began to inwardly pray like an evangelist that when the computers came back on, a divine glitch might provide me another chance to beg for mercy at the hands of rules and regulations that did not make sense in the eyes of life and death. I hoped that the promise of ask and thou shalt receive was actually real and that it might plainly show itself here and now. Please, God, have mercy on me, I softly cried aloud, losing all composure. Why is this happening to me? Don't worry, my friend. God will save you, Mahan Dear gently encouraged. I sat with him hunched over in the waiting area and held his hand tight. Just then, the lights flickered back on and the computers came back online. I perked up, gathered my wits, adjusted my Hindi-British accent, and approached the counter again. Good luck, called Mahan Dear. Can you try my card again, please? There must have been some mistake before the computer shut down. He huffed and puffed and looked at me incredulously with some pause, but took pity on me nonetheless. While I waited for the process denial, I contemplated my only other option, which was receiving medical care in India. Anissa had warned me of the kind of hospital conditions I might find, and my immunity was not strong enough to fight what lingered in a germ-infested war zone like a third-world hospital. American emergency rooms were slow enough, and I was likely not the most urgent case in New Delhi on their patient roster with only traveler's diarrhea, however desperate. So receiving the proper care at home in the States seemed my only way to survive. Okay, what would you like? Business class or first class? What? It went through? I questioned in astonishment, but then quickly hid my shock. I mean, good. Finally, it went through. I was surprised it didn't before. I humbly swallowed the lump of relief forming in my throat and said, one-way business class ticket to New York City, please. And it cost $2,500, way past my credit line. I stood meekly as one lonely tear rolled softly down my dirty cheek. I stole a look over my shoulder at Mahan Dear and smiled at him feebly, and he had his thumb perched up in a good-for-you gesture. I would be back in New York within 48 hours. That is, if God was willing to usher me home. For the right price, I convinced Mahan Dear's boss to let him be my chaperone and stay with me overnight in a nearby hotel until my flight took off. Mahan Dear seemed proud and thankful to be of assistance to me in my dismal time of need. We went back to the infamous Grand Western Regionale Hotel, and immediately upon entering the corridor, I felt much better and more at home with the security of familiar Western comfort. To get what I needed more easily from the concierge, I accessed my authoritative British Hindi tone. "Good day, ma'am. I require a private room as well as a separate one close by for my driver here." I tried again the Amex card, and when it worked once more, I knew for sure that divine intervention was hard at work. I explained to Mahan Dear that I was to do some resting in my room, and that I would like him to remain in his room until I needed him. He was also responsible for my wake-up call for the following morning so that I could arrive to my flight on time, the failure of which would be disastrous. Mahan Dear bowed to me with a respect I did not deserve nor had earned, and said, "I will be waiting, and I will not abandon you." Who was this man? So gentle and tenderly loving, I believed he was indeed my guardian angel from heaven. My room was furnished with a television, a jacuzzi bath, and a guest room, offering me comfort and relief for a few moments. But then, with a sudden blow, the pain came surging back. I had been relatively in control since Mahan Dear rescued me, as if my body knew to hold back so that I could get things done. Now that it was safe to unleash the toxins, my body did so liberally and relentlessly. The thought suddenly occurred to me that my body could go into shock, and that there was a real chance that I might slip into unconsciousness, since I had not slept for over 24 hours. Indeed, I might die right here of dehydration and never make it home. How dreadfully tragic! Without a shred of courage left in my bones, I would not die with honor, and I did not see it as a good day to die. I tried soothing myself encouragingly with self-talk. "Jen, you're okay. Work through it. You're not going to die for this mentality. Manage the pain. It's no big deal." But it was a big deal. A wash of unstoppable emotion swept over me, and I buckled down to my knees like a born-again sinner in repentance. In languish and shame, I flailed my arms like a rag doll, remembering all the mistakes I had committed, all the pain I had inflicted, and all the spitefulness I had clung on to throughout my short life. Cathartically, I cried and sobbed, each cry increasing in intensity. I did not care about the neighboring rooms. If this was to be my last good cry, then I should have it. "Please, God," I pleaded in full volume. "Please, I want to go home. Anything, I'll do anything." The deals had just begun. For what seemed like hours, I wept and called out repeatedly to an empty room, hoping to get some kind of sign from the universal force, from some mystical light, from God himself, fearing all the while that because of my failure as a good human being, I might not be saved, or that even worse, my soul might be lost on the other side of life in a black hole of nothingness forever and ever, or that the worst thing possible was my wretched fate, being damned to hell itself. And yet, if there was a God who heard my pitiful pleas in this final performance, and who was witnessing me wailing like a dying animal, he knew that I had never once questioned his encouraging voice that beckoned me. "But you must go to India." Was this a God of goodness or a God of spite? Just as he showed himself to be with the Jews in the Old Testament again and again, and as the Hebrews lamented to him in their psalms, he would only respond when he was good and ready, when he chose to, not always when they needed him to. I had knowingly given up my free will and obeyed its command devoutly, like it was a magnetic device luring me to some pre-designated endpoint of enlightenment, trying my very best not to question it. I trusted it and disregarded all the common sense that told me not to believe in it, to instead believe what everyone else was trying to tell me, that it was crazy to run off to India. "Didn't you bring me here?" I called out. "Didn't I obey you?" I sobbed inconsolably. "Why? Why did you bring me here?" I screamed. "So that I could be taught a fucking lesson? Well, fuck you!" During my broken-hearted opera, I shuffled hurriedly to and from the toilet, releasing my fluids like a good girl getting potty trained. And during each interim between the snotty howls, I took one banana chip at a time, as Roscoe had instructed, letting my saliva break down its carbs so that I might get an ounce of nutrition and strength. But after the swallow, I saw that it was of no use, for my body instantly rejected it. I simply could take no more. I collapsed onto the floor in a shattered mess, swallowed by my own tears. "But you told me to," I cried with abandon. "You told me to come here." And then my sobs slowly dwindled into soft whimpers. "Even though I look like a fool, I listened to you. I listened to you." My appeals trailed off into a breathless, powerless whisper. All of it, all of this mess had been in vain. I lay completely frozen in grief on the hotel rug for a long while, hugging the ground as if to absorb some of its rooted energy. My short breaths escaped in and out in a steady but pressured rhythm, and I listened. Then suddenly, a small voice from my heart, but independent also, whispered to me. It was not my usual encouraging inner voice that guided me along my journey or that led me to India. And it was not a frightful, weird voice from the dark recesses of my mind. Rather, it was a loving, soft voice outside myself, but one to trust, one that contained kindness, compassion, lightness, wisdom, and unconditional love. It said, "If we send you home, will you do God's will?" Taken aback, I sat up quietly. Were my prayers being answered? How could this be? There actually was a personal God? Realizing I had no faith to begin with, it wasn't that I wanted to prove that God existed to the world, but rather, I wanted God to prove to me that he existed. In the midst of my lamenting soliloquy, here was his loving voice emerging through his angels in the very moment I most needed him. When my disintegrating hope and pathetic excuse for faith might only be preserved if I had even the tiniest sliver of proof. And then, in feeling his profound mercy and goodness, shame swept over me, and I cried, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I had no faith. Please, I just want to go home. Please, God, please let me go home." In solemn desperation, I continued, begging on my knees, "Anything, I'll do anything. Please, God, let me go home. Let me live again. Please, God, let me live again." I sounded like George Bailey, and I didn't give a damn. But I wasn't in a heartwarming tale of finding grace in the discovery of Zuzu's petals. I was in a battle zone with my life at stake, worrying about sustaining my own breath and blood. And yet, the beauty of that tale soothed my heart, because in the end, George was led safely home back to his wonderful life. Again, I heard the sweet, loving voice, "If we send you home, will you do God's will?" Unsure what to think, I did not agree to this supernatural request right away, for what did God's will include for my life? This had to be contemplated. Was I headed for an endless, lifelong journey of suffering or persecution, of carrying the cross? And even if it was achievable, did I have it in me to realize such a task? And would Providence really bestow such grace upon me with all my shortcomings? How could I muster up the strength to assure God that I deserved such a gift? The voice waited for an answer. Then I meekly asked, "What would this entail?" "Write a story. You came here to write a story." All at once, an array of images and ideas flooded my mind. As if a movie clip was projecting in fast motion, I saw an impression of how my life could unfold. It seemed as though I could touch the lives of many and achieve a level of success through creativity, but not be ruled by it. The vision was beautiful and so blessed, and yet so achievable in God's name. It all seemed so feasible and reasonable. This potential future involved using my talent for writing, and the product would send out a surge of good feeling and a newness of perspective, as the universe would use me in my utmost form of meanness. I delighted in this idea. Would I do it? Of course. That was why I traveled to India after all. I went on a journey to discover a story. Sure thing, God. But it won't be easy. The voice warned me in a gentle tone. Okay, I replied with a little hesitation, but with newfound trust. I'll do it. I can do it. Of course you can. If anyone can do it, it's you. The divine voice of kindness continued. Now then, you must believe you can actually get home. But I had essentially given up hope. How was I supposed to believe this with any measure of certainty? I was too tired, and I had already resigned myself to my last repentance. Faith in returning to New York was escaping me by the minute. You have everything you need. That's all you need to worry about. And you have your life. You will get home, this loving spirit said. And then the phrase rang in my ears, home sweet home. The moral of the story was so simple. Even Dorothy was incredulous when Glinda told her that all she had to do was click her heels 3 times to whoosh back home safe and sound. Maybe I could find it somewhere in my inner child to believe. Could it be that easy? That I could simply click my heels 3 times, open my eyes, and find myself home? Was there any room for fairy tale potentialities in real form in India? I thought maybe, just maybe, it was possible. Perhaps I could be the protagonist in the film approached by her guardian angel and be guaranteed a miracle. I hardly could believe my unswerving commitment in doing the deed. With all my newfound trust, all my heart, all of my childhood conviction in magical things, I clicked my heels 3 times, and with all the primal heart power I could muster, I recited as Dorothy had, "There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home." I opened my eyes, and I was still in that room. I really did believe there for a second that I might awake from this wretched dream. But then I knew for sure that some supernatural mediation would save me from dying on this night, because I gained what I needed, faith. In a moment, I received another whisper. It's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. My disposition abruptly changed to a sobering introspection. How far I had come from home, not just in physical miles, but in spirit, in values. I had been so dreadfully wrong about everything. It was all so much simpler than I had thought. Being nice was, after all, really nice. Emotionally and physically worn out like a soldier in the trenches, I turned on the television, fearful of falling asleep and never waking up. Exhausted, I numbly channel surfed and paused at some Indian MTV ripoff showing the Pet Shop Boys singing, "Go West where the air is clean." Fitting. I watched Edge from U2 go numb. Poetic. I clicked and clicked the remote control, coasting through Bollywood illusions and Indian elitist brainwashing until a cartoon allured me. It told the story of a little dewdrop who fell upon the coat of a dog and traveled a long way from home. The cartoon explained the great water odyssey. Although the dewdrop did not get back to its place of origin right away, indeed, a much larger scheme was at play. First, it traveled attached to the dog's coat. When the dog finally shook it free, the dewdrop moved into a grassy meadow. Eventually, the drop was evaporated by an invisible, huge force, bringing it safely back home. Was I this dewdrop? It seemed as though God was trying to tell me something. So gentle and unassuming was his communication. As I lay still and timid, this cartoon was speaking to me in the manner my inner child could receive so that I might feel safe. A warm, liquidy feeling filled my bones, and my heartbeat that had been racing frantically all day began to slow down. I always expected God's voice to be swelling and grandiose, like how he imparted the tablets to Moses. I imagined that his large bellow would blast from a deep crevice in the earth. But here it spoke in a cartoon. How fittingly tender. How very godlike. This is really happening, I reminded myself. I'm not crazy. No, you're not crazy. This tiny inner transmission from heaven might have been speaking to me my whole life, if only I had quieted down long enough to silence my mind and listen. For so long I had been searching, and here it was. I never truly heard God's voice until I found myself in the middle of a hotel room halfway across the planet, utterly alone, horribly ill, humbled beyond all sense of self, with not a scrap of dignity left, and stripped of all my embellishments. This loving, gentle voice instructed me. If you want to get home, obey my commands. Give everything you can, take only what you need. Was God giving me the message that if I gave, I would receive? That it was not only a virtue to give to the poor, but also a law of nature that would reap certain mathematical results? I scurried to Mahan Dear's room and rapped hard on his door, and when he opened it, I was again reminded of India's caste system. His room contained nothing but a dilapidated mattress on the floor with chipped lead peeling paint on the walls, and I, because of the color of my skin and my foreign tourist status, was being treated like royalty. I had paid the same price for both rooms. Will you come to my room, please? I need you right now. Oh, yes, of course, Jennifer. He grabbed his shoes and followed behind me. Mahan Dear gasped with wide eyes when we entered my room, surprised by its extravagance. Embarrassed and angry, I said, "See? Do you see what they do? You deserve what I have as well." Mahan Dear nodded, but he could not possibly know the sense of entitlement with which I spoke as an American, because all his life he had been entitled to nothing. I didn't need all this excess. The Indian upper class didn't need so much excess while my friend had so little. I now scorned the Hindi caste system for its social injustice. Never had I known how poverty and starvation could be such an evil sentence to bear. I then combed through my belongings and began to divide them into two piles, mine and his. I filled his pile with a variety of items that he could sell to young travelers, such as water pills, unopened trail mixes, camping instruments. Mahan Dear was so gracious. "Oh, miss, thank you. You were so kind. Thank you. You were my angel." I was his angel? He was saving my life, and I was just passing on to him trinkets. But indeed, my non-essentials were to him treasures, items that were incredibly unlikely to attain otherwise if God had not intervened, and the presence of which could now put some extra rupees in his pocket. I filled up my huge duffel bag with items I did not need, happy to lighten my load, remembering again Roscoe's advice on traveling lightly that I had earlier ignored. I asked that guiding voice, "What more can I do?" "Give him something to read," it replied. Then I handed him my script of The Wiz that I had been studying to direct that upcoming summer. In the most exquisitely suitable and poetic way, it was a valuable device in helping me click my heels and help restore my hope in getting home. I did not know if he could sell it, but he could read it and remember me. Mahan Dear was overwhelmed and so grateful. I asked him to return to his room and wake me up with at least 3 hours to spare before the flight. Watching the time steadily tick by, I methodically packed my luggage, sending out good wishes to my family and friends and feeling renewed hope for my future life back home, however that should unfold through God's grace. Peering through the draped window, absorbing the muck of the New Delhi streets, I took in the wretched view filled with putrid shades of brown decay and gray ruin. Originally, I had planned an excursion down to Mahabalipuram, near Madras, off the Bay of Bengal to see the Hinduist monument Descent of the Ganges. A waterfall once ran through the monument before India's abundant water supply began to dry up. In the relief stone carving, a hodgepodge of Indian gods stretched their empty cups toward the waterfall. Now, with no water running through it, the monument is a massive symbol of India's dried-up rivers and streams. But now my water was drying up as each hour slowly passed into my further dehydration. Just days before, things were so different. On the day Summit and I went to the market, it was Holi, the festival of colors, when people touted around the streets wearing smears of color on their bodies and faces. The event originated to ask the gods for fertile soil and involved throwing colored water and powder on each other. A band of elephants, mammoth and free, roamed the streets painted in exuberant hues of chartreuse, cerulean blue, and audacious orange, and I stood agape, marveling at the parade. The elephant's attendant noticed my awe and asked me, "Do you want to ride? Want to ride, yes?" Enthusiastically clapping my hands like a young girl at a carnival, I jumped at the chance. "Sure!" Lunged into the air by the entourage, I climbed atop the surprisingly docile mammal. With pride and glory, I moved around the market path for a few precious minutes, like a royal European explorer in the uncharted lands of yesteryear, as the huge beast leisurely ambled along beneath me. Tickled with delight by my innocent thrills, the locals cheered and swung their hands in joy, so entertained by how excited I was to play the part of the Indy Jones I so wanted to be. Through flamboyantly colored, powdered faces, all these pearly smiles beamed at me, happy to have such an amusing diversion enter their day. Without a doubt, good memories were certainly made in my journey here, but I only wish there were more of them. Maybe if I had more time. But as I finished my packing for home, I was filled with a deep reverence for all the beautiful things in America I just could not live without. America was my home, even if it was filled with arrogant assholes. I never slept a wink. The sun had not yet risen when Mahan Dear gently escorted my limp body to the Hindustan white ambassador cab that looked like a Rolls Royce, which was the upgrade I had received for handing over my last few rupees to Mahan Dear's shrewd boss. What a way to be driven home, in such style. Mahan Dear and I rode in the darkness, and although I was still in physical pain, the approaching morn felt soothing and peaceful. I was on my way home. Like the cool surprise of a cold shower after a hot, sweaty day, joyfulness washed over me. I looked at my kind driver. This man really did save my life. He risked his job to stay with me overnight in a land of extreme poverty, where being unemployed meant not eating indefinitely. And because of that risk he so willingly took, I was blessed. He was dedicated to helping me survive, and I wasn't quite sure why. "Mahan Dear, I'm so grateful I met you," I said. "Please don't leave me until I get on the plane home." "Don't worry, my friend. I am here for you. You can trust me," he assured me. "Why were you so nice to me? What could you have possibly gained from it?" "It is like this," Mahan Dear began slowly, searching for the words. "When you do not hold onto yourself, you are rich. But some people think only rich people have riches. But when people hold on to only themselves, they are poor. They lose the most important thing, their souls." I was moved by his wisdom. And yet, could I do for someone else what Mahan Dear did for me? I was not as good a person as he. I believed that God should love him more. But I knew that God loved us equally. How fortunate was I. The hum of the automobile further calmed my anxiety, keeping a steady, pulsing rhythm, which held off my cramps and nausea. I wanted to better know my friend. "Do you know that I had a dream to come to your country? Do you have any dreams, Mahan Dear? Do you one day want to come to America?" "I would very much like that." Suddenly, The sheer immensity of my gratitude for finally going home overwhelmed me. As my jubilance spilled out into giddiness, I lost sight of the pain and began to sing the words to Lennon's song, Imagine. Imagine no possessions, I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. That's a nice song, Mahan Dear said. Have you heard that song before? No, but I do like it. I leaned over the front bench seat and said, let's make up our own words to the melody, okay? Mahan Dear looked at me slyly. I will sing with you if you will drive my car. I suspected no one had ever driven him around in such a luxurious car before. This man would feel like a royal duke sitting in the passenger seat of an ambassador. I happily took his driver's seat as he excitedly moved over, and then we sang, Imagine only peace, I wonder if you can. Everyone always happy in the unity of the land. We laughed heartily. Along the drive, my new Indian friend and I began to daydream together. We talked about where we would like to travel, what we wanted for our lives ahead. I, the chance to use my talents, and he, a stable home with his own bedroom. We had fun in it all. It was innocent and filled with faith in wishes coming true. And why not? My wish to come home was coming true. I promised him sincerely that I would get back in touch with him somehow and get him to come to America to make a decent life for himself one day. Even though I knew it was an impossible suggestion because he was in between residences and had no phone contact or stationary address, somewhere I like to think it was possible. I felt that dreaming gave him hope, and that was a valuable commodity in a land as unpromising as his. You will make it home, my friend. You are a strong woman. I owe you, Mahan Dear. You're saving my life. Then he puzzled me with his next comment. It is nothing what I do. I am doing my duty. You are an American. His simplicity of tone was so genuine that I felt as if I had been a Russian spy, deceiving him of my true identity, undeserving of such respect. Now that I was finally safe at the airport, I felt a little stronger. My anxiety lifted, and my pain had calmed down. I thought of the one memory I would hold dear, despite all the insane chaos of my trip, the Taj Mahal. I had taken so many snapshots of that precious sight. I couldn't wait to enter the split-second freeze of those images and relive that day in all its glorious detail again and again. Those photos of the Taj Mahal were the one dearest thing I was bringing home, and with them, these memories of anguish in time might dissipate. Just before boarding, Mahan Dear handed me an envelope. Read it on the plane, he said. Thank you. I was moved that he managed to find the time to prepare this for me. I wanted to offer him something too, and this is for you. I reached around my neck and removed my sterling silver cross and chain that hung there for the entire crazy trip. Remember me, I said, putting it around his neck. I will never forget you, he said, and we hugged tightly. Profoundly sad to part ways, it was the most difficult farewell on my travel. I reminded him that any dream was possible if he believed in it, and I hoped that simply giving him something to wish for might have made a difference in his life, for he made such an enormous difference in mine. Mahan Dear kept me grounded in a state of panic. He was my friend in a war zone. He chatted with me when I needed to speak my own language and led me safely to every destination on time with no questions asked. He helped me maintain my sanity. I thanked my good-hearted, sweet friend for saving my life, and with grave sadness, I said goodbye. I didn't really know what I was for Mahan Dear, but I knew what he was for me. He was an angel sent in response to my desperate prayer to God. For after this whole ordeal was over and done with, I would never know if he even existed. But for now, I accepted he was real, because I knew that without Mahander Singh, I would not be alive. End of chapter 6. Thanks for listening to Not As Crazy As You Think, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, mental health is attainable for anyone, especially those labeled with mental illness. Until next time, peace out.